Hey, Sahar Galt here, and in this video I'm going to show you how to record acoustic guitars and how to mix them using a couple tools from Universal Audio. Here we go. The most common way to record an acoustic guitar is in stereo, using two mics. This gives the listener a sense of width and captures a more complete sound of the instrument. The spaced pair is a stereo miking technique that's pretty well described by its name. Use a pair of microphones, space them some distance apart, often 3 to 10 feet, and point them at the guitar. Pretty simple. Adjust the spacing until you're happy with the sound. XY is another very important stereo miking technique. You place two microphones angled 90 degrees from one another, with the capsules as close together as possible, but without touching. Now, the two mics form an arrow. Point that towards your guitar. With the XY in the spaced pair, you're going to have two signals. You'll need to pan these, one left, the other right, to get a resultant stereo image. Mid-side is the last stereo technique we'll talk about. You'll use one bidirectional mic with its faces at a 90-degree angle relative to the guitar. A cardioid sits above the bidirectional mic and faces right at the guitar. In such a setup, your bidirectional mic is the side and your cardioid mic is your mid. From there, we have to do a little bit of fiddling on the mixing end of things. First, you duplicate your bidirectional track and hard pan these two identical tracks, one left, one right. Then invert the phase on one of the panned sides. Now balance the side levels, which actually gives you a sort of direct way to control the width of the recording. More sides, wider. Less sides, more narrow. Okay, now stereo miking is powerful, but it's also a little bit complicated and requires gear you might not have. Well, you can record the guitar with a single mic, in mono. And I want to show you that even with such a simple technique, you can still get a pretty great sound. Okay, so here we are set up with a single dynamic mic, in this case, Shure SM57, and it's backed off the guitar about a foot. Your first intuition might be to have the mic quite close and pointed directly into the sound hole, but I think you'll find that will produce a really bassy, boxy sound. And so you'll want to move it back from the guitar a bit until you get a more full picture of what the guitar sounds like. And it's probably not the best idea, especially when using a dynamic mic, which can be a little bit dark, to point it directly at the sound hole. I have it here facing more at where the fretboard meets the body of the guitar, and you'll see what that sounds like. Let's give it a pass. Okay, we did pretty well with the 57. Now to go through a few things on the mixing side, I'm going to load up Universal Audio's API Vision channel strip. The concepts will apply to whatever you want to use, but the Vision has everything we need in one place. It's got a preamp section, so we can add gain and a little saturation, high pass and low pass to clean up the signal, gate, expander, and compressor for sculpting dynamics, and easily one of my favorite EQs. We can turn on these modules individually as we need them. Now I'm going to jump in at the preamp section, and since this plugin's modeled after the API Vision console, a high-end mixing desk, as I bring up the gain, not only will the volume increase, we're also going to get some of that character from the API preamp. That sounded quite nice. That's what it sounded like before. And after. Get the before and after levels a little closer. With the channel strip bypassed, you see we miss some of that warmth. Bring it back. Perfect. Okay, in the rest of the preamp module, we don't need to use the 20 dB pad. We're not hearing any audible distortion at our current level, and there's no real reason to use the invert polarity button in this situation. So let's move on to the filter module, which gives us a low pass and a high pass filter. Switch it on. We're going to work with just the high pass. As you can hear, I'm filtering out signal up to and below the frequency I select. I'm going to keep the setting pretty tame as I'm just trying to clean out low frequency rumble. The real shaping is going to come from the EQ module. This top band can operate in either bell or high shelf, and I just really love the high shelf and the 550 series EQs. We're going to boost from 10K on. It's where the brilliance is. Especially because dynamic mics are a little bit inarticulate in the highs, this really breathes life back into the strings. Now I'm going to switch this bottom band into bell mode, and a boost around 400 Hz can make the guitar feel a little richer. Here's what we had before and after. This is a pretty even performance as is, but we can level out some of the peaks with the compressor. You'll see how quickly you can dial in a great sound with this thing. We're going to choose the slowest attack time, which is 75 milliseconds. And we'll want a soft knee. Now when the compressor engages, it's going to be very subtle. Set the threshold lower to grab a few more of the peaks. And bring down the ratio some. Check out my mixing primer video, by the way, if you're wondering what all these things mean. You can see getting just a little bit of compression when we hit the peaks. And if we choose the slowest possible release, we get a compression that's very natural sounding. All right, let's see how far we've come. Perfect. We took it from something that sounded a little dark and distant and gave it some warmth and sparkle. As a side note, there's one more very interesting feature of Universal Audio's implementation of the API Vision Console channel strip plugin that I'd be remiss if I didn't mention. If you own one of Universal Audio's interfaces, like the Apollo Quad, which I use, or the more newly released Apollo Twin, you can make use of the Unison-enabled preamp plugins like the API strip, the UA610A and B, and the Neve 1073. And the idea is that in unison mode, the preamps on the Apollo can take on the characteristics of these sought-after preamps. The plugin reconfigures the physical input impedance, gain staging response, and other parameters of Apollo's mic preamp hardware to behave and sound like that preamp. Pretty cool. Now, since we decided to record this with a single mic, we only have a mono signal. So no matter where we pan the track in the stereo field, it's not going to take up any width in the soundstage. In a dense, busy mix, maybe that's fine. But for the kinds of tracks that really feature guitar, that's really not going to cut it. Luckily, achieving a stereo signal from a mono track is pretty easy. There are mono to stereo plugins. Delays and choruses can sometimes do this job. Most simply, using reverb to generate a sense of space is very effective. But I want to show you a neat plugin that takes that last idea to the next level. First, we need to make a group track. Ensure that it's configured as stereo, as opposed to our guitar track, which is mono. And we're going to make the output of the mono guitar track point to the stereo group track. This in and of itself doesn't really achieve anything, as you can hear. We need to load up as an insert on the stereo group track Universal Audio's Ocean Way Studios plugin, which is a dynamic room model of the world-famous Studio A and Studio B at Ocean Way Recording. And this goes way beyond a static impulse response snapshot of the spaces. We can control mic placement, the number of mics, even the type of mics. We can, of course, then mix the relative levels of each of the microphones. And there's a great host of presets based around your specific source. You don't have to use their setup parameters, but for simplicity, let's use their guitar setting. We'll stay in Studio B for now. And I'm going to mute the near and far microphones so we can get our bearings. You hear right away, there's a beautiful reverberance and the stereo presence we were after, compared to before, dry and mono. And Since Ocean Way isn't just a static impulse response reverb, we can adjust it to our heart's content. Let's get the close mic back in. This is just the close mics. Now, as I said before, you can even change the type of mics being used. Right now, it's as if it's a pair of AKG C12s, RCA 44 ribbon mics, couple of 57s. The idea being that it's as if those mics are picking up your source in that room. And I happen to think when it comes to reverb, it's a very forward-thinking idea. Now, I figure you want to know what Studio A sounds like. I really prefer the C12s here. For even more room sound, let's get the far mics in. And I can move the mics back in the room. Actually, let me get the wider pair. And you see how big of a difference that has on the character of the sound. I want just a little bit less of the far mics. Now let's compare with no Ocean Way. Width. It's wider, get a sense of depth. Now let's take everything off, including the API strip. That's before. After. All it took was a single mic, a couple tools, a little mixing know-how, and a solid performance. All right, if you have any questions, post in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any future videos. And thanks for watching. I'm Sahar Galt. I'll see you next time.